Hi there. They say love can conquer anything, but what if the real battle isn't with the world outside? It's with his own family. My name is Emma Rodriguez, and 9 months ago, I was just a barista with dreams of becoming a photographer. Then I fell in love with Ryan Thornfield, only to discover his powerful family was running a massive insurance fraud scheme. The night his mother called me trailer trash in a borrowed dress was the night I realized the truth. Sometimes the real danger hides behind chandeliers and perfect smiles. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you're watching from, and thanks for being here. 9 months earlier, I was just Emma Rodriguez, working the morning shift at Brew and Bean Coffee Shop in downtown Portland. You know the type of place: exposed brick walls, chalkboard menus, and the kind of indie music that makes you feel sophisticated for knowing the lyrics. I'd been there since 5 a.m., steaming milk and pretending that my degree in photography meant something more than an expensive piece of paper collecting dust in my studio apartment. The pay was barely enough to cover rent, let alone the student loans that haunted my inbox like digital vultures. But the flexible hours meant I could take freelance photography gigs in the evenings. Weddings, family portraits, the occasional corporate headshot. Anything to keep the lights on and my camera equipment out of the pawn shop. That's when Ryan walked in. He wasn't like the usual morning rush crowd, those caffeine-dependent zombies who grunted their orders while staring at their phones. Ryan actually made eye contact, said please and thank you, and left tips that made my rent payments possible. He ordered the same thing every day: black coffee, 1 sugar, and he'd sit by the window with his laptop for exactly 47 minutes. Yes, I counted. When you're working a job that pays $9.50 an hour, you notice the customers who treat you like an actual human being. You must really love our coffee, I teased him one Tuesday morning after he'd been coming in for about 3 weeks straight. He looked up from his laptop, and I noticed his eyes were this incredible shade of blue, like the Pacific Ocean on a postcard. Actually, the coffee's decent, but I really enjoy the atmosphere. He paused, holding my gaze just long enough to make my cheeks flush. And the service. That's when I learned his name was Ryan Thornfield. When I called it out for his order, he smiled like I'd just told him he'd won the lottery instead of pronouncing his name correctly. During my breaks, he started asking questions. Where was I from originally? What brought me to Portland? What did I do besides make excellent lattes? I told him about growing up in the Riverside Trailer Park, about 30 minutes outside the city. Raised by my mom, who worked 3 jobs after my dad decided fatherhood wasn't for him. I mentioned my photography dreams, how I was saving up to maybe open a small studio someday. I didn't mention how sometimes I had to choose between buying groceries or paying my phone bill, or how my studio apartment was actually a converted garage behind someone's house. Some truths were too raw for coffee shop small talk. That takes incredible determination, Ryan said, genuine admiration in his voice. Most people I know had everything handed to them, including me, if I'm being honest. That was my first hint that Ryan came from money, though he wore it like a well-tailored suit. Expensive but not flashy. His watch was nice, but not obnoxious. His car was decent, but not screaming, "Look at my trust fund." It wasn't until he asked me to dinner that I started connecting the dots. Our first date was at Celeste, this Italian place downtown where the cheapest entree cost more than I usually spent on food in a week. I ordered carefully, went light on the wine, and spent the entire meal terrified I'd use the wrong fork or mispronounce something on the menu. But Ryan seemed genuinely interested in my photography work, asking thoughtful questions about technique and lighting that told me he'd actually listened during our coffee shop conversations. My family runs Thornfield Insurance, he explained when I asked about his work. I'm in the claims division, but honestly, I'd rather do something more meaningful someday. Something that actually helps people instead of just making money. I nodded and smiled, but my stomach was already dropping. I'd never heard of Thornfield Insurance, but the way he said it, casual, like mentioning the weather, suggested it was something I should know. Later that night, after Ryan had walked me to my car and kissed me goodnight like a gentleman from a movie, I Googled his family name, my laptop screen filled with articles about Thornfield Insurance, one of the largest regional insurance companies in the Pacific Northwest. There was Ryan's father, David Thornfield, pictured at charity galas and business conferences. And there was his mother, Margaret Thornfield, described as the power behind the throne, the strategic mind who'd grown the company from a small-town agency into a multi-million-dollar operation. I almost canceled our second date. What was I thinking? I lived in a converted garage and survived on ramen noodles and hope. He probably had a trust fund worth more than my entire trailer park had ever been collectively. But Ryan called the next day, his voice warm and sincere as he told me how much he'd enjoyed our evening together. Against my better judgment, I said yes to dinner again. Over the next 6 months, our relationship deepened in ways that surprised me. Ryan never made me feel small because of my background. He was just as happy eating at the diner where I sometimes grabbed coffee before work as he was taking me to upscale restaurants. He showed genuine interest in my photography, even offering to connect me with the marketing team at his family's company. "You have real talent, Emma," he'd say, looking through my portfolio on my ancient laptop. "Any company would be lucky to have you." When he first told me he loved me, we were walking along the Willamette River at sunset. No grand gestures, no expensive gifts, just a simple, heartfelt declaration as we watched the light fade over the water. I realized then that I loved him too, not because of his family name or wealth, but because of the way he listened when I talked about my dreams, the way he never made me feel ashamed of working multiple jobs to survive. Of course, there were moments that highlighted our different worlds, like when he casually mentioned skiing in Aspen as a kid, or when he didn't understand why I was so excited about landing a $300 wedding photography gig. But Ryan always listened and learned. He never made me feel less than. For 6 beautiful months, we existed in our own bubble, largely separate from his family's world of country clubs and charity galas. We built something real on shared values and genuine connection. I began to believe that maybe our different backgrounds wouldn't matter, but I was keeping a secret that would change everything. See, I wasn't just a barista with photography dreams. 3 years ago, when my mom got scammed out of her life savings by some insurance fraud scheme, I'd started working part-time for Pike Investigations, a small detective agency downtown. It started as a way to understand how these scams worked, maybe help other people avoid what happened to my mom. But I discovered I had a real talent for investigation work. Patience, attention to detail, and the ability to blend into backgrounds and capture things people didn't want captured. Pike Investigations mostly handled insurance fraud cases, fake disability claims, staged accidents, people claiming injuries that mysteriously healed when they thought no one was watching. My photography skills made me perfect for surveillance work, and my ordinary appearance, just another young woman with a camera, meant I could get close to subjects without raising suspicion. I'd been working on a particularly complex case involving staged car accidents when I noticed something disturbing in the paperwork. Thornfield Insurance kept appearing as the company processing these obviously fraudulent claims. At first, I thought it was just bad luck or poor oversight. Insurance fraud happened to every company, but then I started digging deeper. The pattern was too consistent to be coincidence. Thornfield wasn't just failing to catch fraud. They were actively facilitating it. Fake claims were being approved with minimal investigation. Legitimate claims were being denied on technicalities, while obviously fraudulent ones sailed through the system. Someone was making money off both ends of the scheme. I brought my concerns to Patricia "Pat" Morgan, the former police detective who ran Pike Investigations. Pat had seen every kind of scam in her 25 years of law enforcement, and she knew insurance fraud when she saw it. "This is bigger than fake whiplash claims," Pat said, spreading my evidence across her desk. "Someone's running a systematic operation here. The question is how high up it goes." That's when I realized I was investigating my boyfriend's family business, and potentially my boyfriend's family. The ethical thing would have been to remove myself from the case immediately. Instead, I made a decision that would haunt me for months. I kept investigating, telling myself I needed to know if Ryan was involved before I could figure out what to do with the information. What I discovered over the next few weeks made my stomach turn. Margaret Thornfield wasn't just the strategic mind behind the company's growth. She was the architect of a sophisticated fraud scheme. She'd identified doctors, lawyers, and body shops willing to participate in staged accidents and fake injuries. Clients would pay premiums for legitimate coverage, while the company paid out fraudulent claims to Margaret's network of conspirators. The legitimate customers subsidized the fraud through higher premiums, never knowing their money was funding an elaborate scam. I had photos of Margaret meeting with known fraudsters, I had audio recordings of phone conversations where she discussed managing difficult claims. I had documents showing patterns of approved payouts that would make any honest investigator suspicious. But I also had a boyfriend I was falling deeper in love with. A boyfriend who seemed genuinely unaware of what his mother was doing. The moral dilemma was eating me alive when Ryan's invitation arrived like a perfectly timed grenade. "My mom wants to meet you," Ryan said one evening as we shared takeout in my tiny living space. "She's hosting a dinner party this weekend to celebrate the company's 25th anniversary. She specifically asked me to invite you." My chopsticks froze halfway to my mouth. "She wants to meet me?" Ryan nodded, though something in his expression suggested he wasn't entirely thrilled about the prospect. "It's a big deal. She doesn't usually invite." He paused, searching for words. "Outsiders," I finished. I was going to say, people she hasn't vetted thoroughly first. He squeezed my hand. "But yes, she's protective of the family reputation." The irony was almost funny. Margaret Thornfield was worried about me damaging the family reputation while running an insurance fraud scheme that could destroy everything they'd built. "Will there be many people there?" I asked, already feeling my stomach tighten. "About 15 guests. Mostly business associates, a few family friends, nothing too formal." He paused. "I know it sounds intimidating, but she'll love you, Emma. How could she not?" His confidence was touching, but did little to calm my nerves, especially since I was sitting on enough evidence to send his mother to prison. For the next week, I obsessed over every detail. What would I wear? How should I act? Should I tell Ryan about the investigation before meeting his mother? The questions circled in my mind like vultures, picking at my sanity. My best friend Sarah listened patiently to my concerns over coffee the following Sunday. Sarah worked as a paralegal at a downtown law firm, which meant she understood both fashion requirements and legal implications better than most people. "You need a killer dress," she declared. "Something that makes you feel confident, but not like you're trying too hard." We spent the entire afternoon combing through department stores, but everything suitable for dining with insurance royalty was far beyond my budget. $400 for a dress I'd wear once seemed insane when that amount represented half my rent. "I still have that navy silk dress from my sister's wedding," Sarah offered, seeing my despair. "It would fit you perfectly with a few adjustments. And my pearl earrings, too. You'll look like you belong there." "I can't borrow your dress," I protested weakly. Though relief was already washing over me, "Of course you can. That's what friends are for." The week before the dinner, I practiced walking in heels around my apartment until my neighbors probably thought I'd lost my mind. I watched YouTube videos on formal dining etiquette, memorizing which fork to use for each course. I researched the Thornfield family history online, looking for safe conversation topics that wouldn't reveal how much I already knew about their business practices. What I should have been doing was preparing for the confrontation I knew was coming. Because deep down, I knew this dinner party wasn't just about meeting the family. Margaret Thornfield was evaluating a threat to her carefully constructed world, and I was walking into her territory with evidence that could destroy everything. The night before the party, my mom called from her new apartment. The one she could finally afford after Pike investigations had helped her recover some of her stolen money. "Just remember who you are, baby," she said. "You're smart, you're kind, and you're worthy of respect, regardless of how much money anyone has. Don't let them make you feel small." I clung to her words as I prepared the next evening, taking extra care with my hair and makeup. Sarah's dress fit perfectly, the navy silk flowing elegantly to just below my knees. Her pearl earrings added a touch of classic sophistication. Looking in the mirror, I barely recognized the confident woman staring back at me. When Ryan picked me up, his expression made all the anxiety worth it. "You look absolutely stunning," he whispered, kissing me softly. His usual modest sedan had been replaced with a sleek black luxury car driven by a uniformed chauffeur. As we settled into the plush leather seats, I felt like Cinderella heading to the ball, if Cinderella had been carrying evidence of the royal family's criminal activity in her purse. "Just be yourself," Ryan said, sensing my nervousness. "They're just people, Emma. Wealthy people, yes, but still just people with their own insecurities and flaws." The drive took us through increasingly affluent neighborhoods until we turned onto a private road lined with towering Douglas firs. As the Thornfield estate came into view, my mouth went dry. It wasn't just a house. It was a mansion that looked like it belonged in a magazine spread, complete with manicured gardens and a circular driveway where valets waited to park arriving vehicles. "You grew up here," I whispered, unable to hide my awe. Ryan nodded, looking slightly embarrassed. "Home sweet home, ready?" "No," I thought. But I took his offered arm and walked toward the massive front doors anyway. The Thornfield Mansion's grand foyer took my breath away. A crystal chandelier larger than my entire apartment hung from a ceiling painted with some kind of Renaissance-style clouds and angels. Marble floors gleamed beneath our feet, and a sweeping staircase curved majestically to the upper floors. The air smelled like fresh flowers and money. If money had a smell, this was it. Impeccably dressed staff moved silently among the arriving guests, collecting coats and offering champagne on silver trays. I accepted a glass gratefully, needing something to occupy my shaking hands. "Ryan, darling," a tall, elegant woman approached us, her silver blonde hair swept into a perfect chignon. She air-kissed both his cheeks before turning her cool blue eyes to me. This had to be Margaret Thornfield, though she looked nothing like the grainy surveillance photos in my investigation files. In person, she radiated the kind of authority that came from years of being the smartest person in every room. "Mother, this is Emma Rodriguez," Ryan said, his hand reassuring on the small of my back. "Emma, my mother, Margaret Thornfield." I extended my hand with what I hoped was an appropriate smile. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Thornfield. Thank you for including me in this celebration." Her handshake was brief and evaluating, like she was testing the quality of my bones. "Of course. Ryan has mentioned you." The slight emphasis on mentioned made it clear I'd been a topic of very limited discussion. "What a lovely dress. Such an interesting choice for an anniversary celebration." Before I could respond to what was clearly a subtle critique of my outfit, a younger woman bounded up to us, her warm smile a stark contrast to her mother's restrained greeting. Finally, I've been dying to meet the woman who's made my brother actually smile for the first time in years. She hugged me without hesitation. "I'm Jessica, the cooler Thornfield sibling." Ryan laughed. "My sister lacks our mother's gift for subtlety." Jessica linked her arm through mine. "Come on, let me introduce you to some people who actually know how to have fun. Most of them, anyway." As we moved through the crowd, I became acutely aware of the appraising glances following us. Jessica introduced me to business partners, family friends, and various Thornfield relatives, most of whom were polite in that specific way wealthy people had perfected, pleasant on the surface, evaluating underneath. The questions began innocuously enough. "And what do you do, Emma?" asked an older woman, whose jewelry probably cost more than I made in a year. "I work at a coffee shop downtown while building my photography business," I answered honestly. "How entrepreneurial," she replied, her smile not reaching her eyes. "And how did you and Ryan meet?" Each time I explained our coffee shop meet cute, I watched the subtle shifts in expression. Raised eyebrows, exchanged glances, thin smiles. The unspoken judgment was palpable. "Oh, I just love those Cinderella stories," gushed one woman, as if I were a character from a fairy tale, rather than a person standing right in front of her. "Ryan always did have such a generous heart." "Charitable, really," murmured another, just loudly enough for me to hear. Jessica squeezed my arm supportively. "Ignore them. They're just jealous because you have actual personality and don't need to buy your friends." We eventually made our way to Ryan's father, David Thornfield. I'd expected another version of Margaret's cold calculation, but David surprised me with genuine warmth. "So you're the young woman who's put such a real smile on my son's face," he said, clasping my hand between both of his. "It's wonderful to meet you, Emma." His kindness was a momentary respite from the scrutiny, but as we moved away, Jessica leaned in to whisper, "Dad's always been the nice one. It's Mom you need to worry about." As the evening progressed, I managed a few pleasant conversations. A young cousin of Ryan's who was studying art, an elderly family friend who seemed genuinely interested in photography. But for every friendly interaction, there were three that left me feeling examined and found wanting. Throughout it all, Ryan remained attentive, his hand rarely leaving mine, stepping in when conversations became too pointed. But even he couldn't shield me from what was coming next. A staff member announced that dinner would be served, and we were directed toward an ornate dining room dominated by a massive mahogany table set with gleaming silver and crystal glasses that caught the light from another spectacular chandelier. My heart sank when I realized the seating arrangements had placed me directly across from Margaret Thornfield, with Ryan to my right and an empty chair to my left. The placement felt strategic, like I was being positioned for interrogation rather than conversation. Jessica caught my eye from further down the table and gave me an encouraging thumbs up when her mother wasn't looking. "Quite the production, isn't it?" Ryan whispered as he held my chair. "Just remember, there are only 6 courses and 12 different forks." When I looked at him in horror, he laughed quietly. "Kidding. It's just a normal dinner with extremely expensive wine." But as the first course arrived, some kind of delicate soup I didn't recognize, I realized this was going to be anything but normal. The conversation around the table focused on topics that seemed designed to exclude outsiders: stock portfolios, private schools, vacation homes in countries I'd only seen in movies. I remained quiet, concentrating on not making any social blunders, while taking tiny sips of wine that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. Margaret, meanwhile, held court from her position at the head of the table, graciously directing conversation while her eyes periodically settled on me with the intensity of a predator sizing up prey. "So, Emma," Margaret's voice suddenly cut through the general chatter, addressing me directly for the first time since our initial introduction. The table quieted, attention shifting to our exchange. "Ryan tells me you work in food service." The way she said food service made it sound like I was handling toxic waste rather than crafting artisanal lattes. I set down my spoon carefully. "I work at Brew and Bean Coffee Shop, yes. It helps pay for my education and gives me flexibility for my photography work." She raised an eyebrow. "Photography? How creative. And what type of photography do you specialize in?" "Mainly portraits and events, weddings, family sessions, some corporate work." "Corporate work," she repeated, as if the concept of me having business clients was amusing. "And where did you study photography?" "Portland Community College initially, then some workshops and online courses. I'm mostly self-taught through practice and mentorship." Several seats away, I heard someone whisper "community college" to their neighbor. Margaret's smile sharpened. "Self-taught, how resourceful. And you grew up here in Portland?" Another landmine. "Actually, I grew up about 30 minutes outside the city, a smaller community." "How lovely. And what does your father do?" The question was designed to wound, and from Margaret's expression, she knew exactly what she was doing. Ryan tensed beside me. "My father isn't in the picture," I answered evenly. "My mother raised me and my sister on her own." "I see. And your mother's profession?" "She works in retail now. Before that, she did whatever was necessary to support us. House cleaning, waitressing, factory work when it was available." An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Margaret took a sip of wine, letting the moment stretch. "Service work," she said finally. "A family tradition, then." "Margaret," David's voice carried a warning tone from the other end of the table. "I'm simply making conversation, dear." Her eyes never left mine. "It's fascinating how patterns repeat through generations, though I suppose some people do manage to elevate themselves through—" She paused, letting her gaze drift meaningfully toward Ryan. Strategic connections. The implication was clear, and the blood rushed to my cheeks. Ryan set down his fork harder than necessary. "Emma's mother made incredible sacrifices to give her daughters opportunities," he said firmly. "She should be admired, not condescended to." Margaret waved a dismissive hand. "Of course, darling, I meant no offense. It's simply interesting to observe how different people approach life's challenges." The second course arrived, temporarily halting the interrogation. As servers placed beautifully arranged salads before each guest, I felt like I was sitting in the eye of a hurricane, waiting for the real storm to hit. "Emma," Margaret continued once the servers had retreated, "I hope you don't mind my curiosity, but I'm always fascinated by how young people navigate financial independence these days. Your coffee shop position must provide quite a modest income." "It covers my basic expenses," I replied carefully. "I imagine it would have to, given the cost of living in Portland. Though I suppose someone in your position learns to be creative about managing limited resources." Her smile was sharp as broken glass. "That dress, for example, it's lovely. Is it from this season?" The question was so blatantly designed to embarrass me that several guests looked away in discomfort. I felt my cheeks burning, but kept my expression neutral. "It belongs to a friend." She was kind enough to lend it to me for tonight. Ah, Margaret nodded, her eyes glittering with malicious satisfaction. Borrowed. I thought as much. There's something about borrowed finery that's always detectable to the trained eye. Ryan started to rise from his seat. Mother, that's enough. Sit down, Ryan. Margaret's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to absolute obedience. If Emma is going to be part of our social circle, she needs to develop thicker skin. People will talk, after all. My skin is plenty thick, Mrs. Thornfield, I replied quietly. It had to be, growing up the way I did. Something in my calm response seemed to infuriate her further. She leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to a dangerous register that nonetheless carried throughout the now silent room. Let me be very clear, Emma. My son may be temporarily amused by this little... She waved a hand dismissively. Experiment in social charity, but make no mistake. You are nothing but trailer trash in a borrowed dress. And you will never, ever belong in this family or this world. The words hit like physical blows. 15 pairs of eyes fixed on me, witnessing what Margaret clearly assumed would be my destruction. David stared at his plate. Jessica's mouth hung open in shock. Ryan was halfway out of his chair, rage contorting his features. But something unexpected happened inside me. A lifetime of being underestimated, of fighting harder for everything I had, of proving people wrong, rose up like a tidal wave. Instead of the tears Margaret was clearly expecting, I felt a strange calm wash over me. I rose slowly from my seat, smoothing the borrowed silk of my dress. The room remained frozen in shocked silence, all attention focused on me. Margaret's expression was one of smug satisfaction, clearly expecting me to run from the room in humiliation. Instead, I picked up my water glass and took a small, deliberate sip, before setting it down carefully. Trailer trash, I repeated the word slowly, my voice steady and clear in the silent room. What an interesting choice of words, Mrs. Thornfield. I looked around the table, making brief eye contact with several guests before returning my gaze to Margaret. I want to thank you, actually. I've been struggling with a moral dilemma for months, and you just made my decision remarkably easy. Margaret's smug expression faltered slightly. What are you babbling about? You see, Mrs. Thornfield, Ryan believes I only work at the coffee shop. That's partly true. I do work there mornings, but for the past 3 years, I've also been working part-time for Pike Investigations, a detective agency downtown. A ripple of whispers circled the table. Margaret's face remained impassive, but I noticed her knuckles whitening around her wine glass. 6 months ago, before I met your son, I was assigned to investigate a complex insurance fraud case. During that investigation, a name kept appearing in our documents. Your name, Mrs. Thornfield. Now the color drained from Margaret's face. Beside me, Ryan had gone completely still. Our investigation uncovered evidence of systematic insurance fraud spanning several years. We found documentation of fake disability claims being approved with minimal investigation, legitimate claims being denied, while obviously fraudulent ones sailed through the system. We discovered a network of doctors, lawyers, and repair shops all connected to Thornfield Insurance, all participating in what appears to be a sophisticated scheme to defraud both insurance companies and the clients who pay premiums in good faith. The silence in the room had transformed from shocked to stunned. Jessica's eyes were wide, darting between her mother and me. David had pressed a hand to his chest, his face pale. When I realized who Ryan was, I faced an ethical dilemma. I immediately disclosed our relationship to my supervisor and removed myself from active investigation duties. I even convinced the agency to delay turning over our evidence to authorities while we sought additional corroboration. I leaned forward slightly, my eyes locked with Margaret's. I did that out of respect for Ryan because I'd fallen in love with him. I didn't want his family's potential wrongdoing to complicate what we had. I spent months hoping we were wrong, that there was some innocent explanation for the patterns we'd discovered. This is preposterous, Margaret's voice was strained. You're making wild accusations with no basis in... I have photographs, I interrupted calmly, reaching into my small purse. Photos of you meeting with known insurance fraudsters. I have audio recordings of phone conversations discussing problematic claims and how to manage difficult adjusters. I have copies of internal documents showing approval patterns that would make any honest investigator suspicious. I pulled out my phone, holding it up for the table to see. I also have something even more interesting. 3 weeks ago, I took a part-time job with a wedding photography company. Guess whose anniversary party I was hired to photograph? Margaret's face had gone from pale to an alarming shade of red. That's right, I was supposed to be working tonight as a photographer. Instead, I'm here as your son's guest, watching you insult me while knowing that I have hours of audio and video evidence of you and your business associates discussing your fraud operation in explicit detail. A glass shattered somewhere down the table. Margaret had pushed back her chair and was half standing, her hands shaking with rage. "This is blackmail," she hissed. "You're trying to extort—" "I'm not trying to extort anything," I replied calmly. "In fact, I've been protecting you for months. The district attorney's office has been asking for our evidence since January. I've been the one asking for more time, hoping to find some way to minimize the impact on Ryan and his family." I stood up fully, straightening to my full height. "But you just made something very clear to me, Mrs. Thornfield. You said I'm trailer trash who will never belong in this world. You're absolutely right. I don't belong in a world where people like you can steal from working families, and then look down on those same families as beneath your notice." I typed a quick message on my phone while continuing to speak. That was a text to my supervisor, informing him that I'm formally removing my objection to turning over our evidence. Pike Investigations will deliver everything to the district attorney's office first thing Monday morning. The room erupted in chaos. Margaret lunged forward, her face contorted with rage. "You little nothing, do you have any idea who you're dealing with? I will destroy you." But before she could reach me, she stumbled, her hand flying out to steady herself against the table. Instead of finding purchase on the polished wood, her palm struck my face with a sharp crack that echoed through the dining room. The slap was harder than she'd intended, the force of her stumble adding momentum to what might have been just a gesture of fury. The sound reverberated through the sudden silence like a gunshot. For a moment, time seemed suspended. My cheek burned where her rings had caught the skin, and I could taste blood where my teeth had cut the inside of my lip. Margaret stood frozen, her hand still raised, looking almost as shocked as I felt. But instead of tears or anger, I felt something else entirely. A crystalline clarity that cut through the chaos like a blade. I reached up and touched my cheek, feeling the wetness where her rings had broken the skin. When I pulled my fingers away, there was blood on my fingertips. "Thank you," I said quietly, holding up my bloodied hand for the entire table to see. I was wondering how I was going to explain to the police why I decided to come forward. "She hit me" is much simpler than "she hurt my feelings." Margaret's face went white. "I didn't mean that was an accident." "Oh, Mrs. Thornfield," I smiled, pulling out my phone again. "You might want to look up. See that small device on the chandelier? Wedding photographers always scout locations in advance. I've been recording everything since we sat down for dinner." The lie came so smoothly, I almost believed it myself. There was no recording device, but Margaret's guilty conscience made her crane her neck upward anyway, searching the ornate fixture desperately. "So now I have video evidence of you assaulting me, audio of you calling me trailer trash, and 15 witnesses who heard you make threatening statements." I tucked my phone back into my purse. "Plus all that fraud evidence, of course." Ryan finally found his voice. "Emma, is this all true?" I turned to him, seeing the confusion and hurt in his eyes. "I'm sorry I kept the investigation from you. I was trying to protect you from an impossible choice between your family and the truth." "You believe this person over your own mother?" Margaret's voice was shrill with desperation. Ryan looked between us, his jaw working silently. Finally, he spoke. "I've been questioning some of our claim approval patterns for years, Mother. You always told me to focus on my own department and not worry about company-wide policies." He took a step toward me, close enough that I could see the pain and conflict in his eyes. "You really didn't know who I was when we met?" "I had no idea," I said softly. "You were just the kind man who ordered black coffee with 1 sugar and actually looked me in the eye when you said thank you." He studied my face for a long moment, then turned back to his mother. "I believe her." Margaret's composure finally cracked completely. "You ungrateful fool. Everything I've built, everything you stand to inherit, and you side with this nobody." "Her name is Emma," Ryan said firmly. "And yes, I believe her over you." The sound Margaret made was barely human, a mixture of rage and desperation that seemed to come from somewhere deep in her chest. She grabbed the nearest wine glass and hurled it at the wall behind me, sending crystal fragments scattering across the marble floor. "Get out," she screamed. "All of you, get out, this is my house." But the damage was already done. Several guests were already making discreet exits, murmuring uncomfortable apologies. David had produced his phone and was making what looked like urgent calls to lawyers. Jessica had moved to stand near us, her expression a mixture of shock and what appeared to be grudging admiration. "Well," she said, breaking some of the tension, "this is definitely the most exciting anniversary dinner we've ever had." As Margaret continued her breakdown, alternating between threats, denials, and incoherent rage, I realized that my part in this drama was over. I'd lit the fuse. Now I needed to get clear of the explosion. "I should go," I told Ryan quietly. "I'll drive you," he said immediately. I shook my head. "You need to be here with your family. This is going to be a difficult night for everyone, and I'm the last person who should be here." "Emma, please," Ryan started. "We'll talk," I promised. "But not tonight. Call me tomorrow if you still want to." As I gathered my things, David Thornfield approached me. To my surprise, he took my hands in his. "My dear," he said quietly, "while I can't say I'm pleased about what's coming, I must admit you showed remarkable courage tonight. No one has stood up to Margaret like that in decades." I swallowed hard. "I'm sorry this celebration was ruined," he smiled sadly. 25 years in business teaches you that truth, however unpleasant, is always preferable to comfortable lies. Jessica appeared at my side. "I'll walk you out," she said firmly. As we headed toward the door, she whispered, "Thank you. Someone needed to stop her, and none of us had the guts to do it." I left the mansion with my head held high, declining Ryan's repeated offers to accompany me. As the taxi drove me away from the estate, I watched the grand house recede in the rear window, wondering if I had just destroyed the first real love I'd ever known. My phone buzzed with a message from Pat. "Got your text. Ready to move forward Monday. Are you okay?" I typed back. Yes, it was the right decision. But as the taxi continued through the night, tears finally began to fall. Not because of Margaret's cruelty or the public humiliation, but because in standing up for the truth, I might have lost the man I loved. The following Monday morning became a media circus that made my head spin. Pike Investigations delivered our complete file to the district attorney's office at 9 a.m. sharp. By noon, news vans were parked outside Thornfield Insurance's downtown headquarters. By evening, local stations were running stories about the insurance fraud dynasty, with grainy photos of Margaret being led away in handcuffs after her arrest. My phone rang constantly, reporters wanting exclusive interviews, other fraud victims coming forward with their own horror stories, job offers from law firms and investigative agencies across the country. The barista who'd served coffee 6 months ago was suddenly the face of corporate whistleblowing in Portland. Through it all, the one call I was waiting for never came. "You did the right thing," Pat assured me when I finally answered her call that Tuesday. "You know how many families this woman has hurt? How many people paid premiums they couldn't afford while she lined her pockets with fraudulent claims?" I knew she was right. Over the next few weeks, as federal investigators dug deeper into Thornfield's records, the scope of Margaret's operation became staggering. She'd stolen millions from working families over nearly a decade. People like my mother who trusted that their insurance companies would be there when disaster struck. The local news ran a segment called "The Faces Behind the Fraud," featuring families whose legitimate claims had been denied, while Margaret approved fake ones for her network of co-conspirators. A young mother whose house fire claim was rejected on a technicality, while Margaret paid out a fraudulent auto accident worth twice as much. An elderly veteran whose medical expenses were denied, while fake disability claims sailed through the system. But knowing I was right didn't make the loneliness any easier to bear. Ryan finally called on Thursday evening, 6 days after the dinner party that changed everything. 6 days that felt like 6 months. "Hi," he said simply when I answered on the first ring. "Hi," I whispered back, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Can I come over? We need to talk." 20 minutes later, he was standing at my door, looking like he'd aged years in less than a week. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his usually neat hair was disheveled. We sat on my small couch, maintaining careful distance between us like we were strangers instead of two people who'd been planning a future together just days earlier. "Where have you been?" I asked, breaking the silence. "Hotels, mostly. Meeting with lawyers, trying to figure out what's left of the company after the FBI finished going through our files." He ran both hands through his hair, a gesture I remembered from our early dates when he was nervous. My grandfather came out of retirement to try to salvage what he could. Most of the legitimate employees are going to lose their jobs because of what my mother did. The weight of that hit me like a punch to the stomach. "Ryan, I'm so sorry." "Don't," he said firmly, his voice sharper than I'd ever heard it. For a moment, my heart stopped. Then his expression softened. "Don't apologize for doing the right thing. I've spent the last week going through company files with federal investigators, Emma. What you uncovered was just the tip of the iceberg. My mother..." He shook his head. "She's been stealing from families for years. Families exactly like yours." We sat in silence, the weight of everything that had happened settling between us like a wall. "I'm angry," Ryan said finally. "I'm furious that you didn't trust me with the truth earlier, but I understand why you didn't. And I'm ashamed that it took someone from outside our family to make us see what was right in front of us." I felt tears threatening again. "I wanted to tell you so many times, but I was terrified of losing you, and I kept hoping I was wrong about everything." "You weren't wrong," his voice was flat, exhausted. "If anything, you were too generous. The investigators found evidence going back 12 years, Emma. 12 years of systematic fraud." "What happens now?" I asked, the question I'd been afraid to voice for days. Ryan was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. When he looked up, I saw pain in his blue eyes, but also something else: determination. "Now we try to rebuild. The company, if that's even possible. Our family relationships, what's left of them, and us." He reached for my hand tentatively, like he was approaching a frightened animal. "If there still is in us." I looked at his tired face, the same face that had smiled at me across countless coffee shop counters, and felt my heart make the decision before my brain could interfere. "I'd like there to be," I said softly. The road back wasn't easy. The media attention was relentless for weeks. Photographers outside my apartment, reporters calling my mother in her small town, strangers recognizing me at the grocery store and either praising me as a hero or cursing me for destroying a local business. I had to change my phone number twice. Margaret was formally charged with 18 counts of insurance fraud, racketeering, conspiracy, and money laundering. The perp walk footage of her being led from the federal courthouse, her usually perfect hair disheveled and her hands cuffed behind her back, became a viral sensation on social media. Someone set it to dramatic music, and it got 3 million views on TikTok. Ryan testified against his own mother at her trial, his voice steady, but his hands shaking as he detailed what he'd discovered in the company files after my revelation. I testified too, walking the jury through months of investigation, showing them surveillance photos and playing recordings that documented years of systematic theft. The hardest part was listening to victim impact statements during sentencing. A single mother whose house fire claim was rejected, while Margaret approved a fake auto accident for twice the payout. An elderly man whose legitimate medical expenses were denied, while obviously fraudulent disability claims sailed through the system. A young couple whose wedding photography business failed after their equipment theft claim was denied, even though they had police reports and serial numbers. "She stole more than money," one woman said, speaking directly to Margaret from the witness stand. "She stole my faith that the system would protect me when I needed it most. She stole my ability to trust that doing the right thing, paying my premiums, following the rules, would matter when disaster struck." Margaret got 15 years in federal prison. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, looked directly at her during sentencing. "You betrayed the trust of thousands of families who paid premiums they could barely afford, trusting that you would be there in their time of greatest need. Instead, you stole from them to fund an elaborate criminal enterprise that enriched you and your co-conspirators at the expense of the very people insurance is meant to protect. This court finds your actions particularly egregious because they specifically targeted working families, people who could least afford to lose what little financial security they had managed to build." I felt no satisfaction watching Margaret led away in shackles, just a hollow sense that justice, while necessary, couldn't undo all the damage that had been done to the families she'd hurt. Ryan and I rebuilt our relationship slowly, with complete honesty this time. He sold his stock in what remained of Thornfield Insurance and used the money to start a nonprofit organization, helping insurance fraud victims navigate the claims process and recover stolen money. It was meaningful work that gave him purpose in a way his corporate job never had. "I can't undo what my family did," he told me one evening as we sorted through case files at the nonprofit's small office. "But maybe I can help some of these families get back what was stolen from them." I left the coffee shop and joined Pike Investigations full-time, specializing in white-collar crime cases. My photography skills, combined with my investigative instincts and newfound reputation, made me particularly effective at documenting corporate fraud. Soon I was consulting with district attorneys' offices across the Pacific Northwest, helping them build cases against executives who thought their wealth made them untouchable. The work was satisfying in a way I'd never expected. Every fraudulent executive we caught, every stolen pension fund we helped recover, felt like a small victory for every working family who'd ever been told their legitimate claim wasn't worth investigating. 6 months after Margaret's sentencing, Ryan and I moved in together, not to his family's estate or my converted garage, but to a modest apartment downtown that we chose together and furnished with things we both picked out and could afford on our honest salaries. No more borrowed dresses or feeling like I didn't belong. We were building something real based on shared values, rather than inherited privilege. The most unexpected development was my relationship with Jessica. Far from blaming me for her mother's downfall, she became one of my closest friends. "You saved our family," she told me over coffee one afternoon, about 8 months after everything exploded. "We were all living a lie, and you forced us to face the truth. That took more courage than any of us had ever shown." Even David, once he'd processed the shock and grief of discovering his wife's true nature, reached out to thank me. "I should have seen the signs," he said, during one of our awkward but healing conversations. "I was so focused on keeping peace in the family that I enabled terrible things to happen. You showed me what real integrity looks like, even when it costs you everything." A year after that explosive dinner party, I found myself back in a formal dining room. But this time, it was for a very different kind of celebration. Ryan had proposed during a sunset walk along the Willamette River, in the exact same spot where he'd first told me he loved me. Simple, heartfelt, perfect. The engagement party was held at Jessica's apartment, with our real friends and chosen family filling the space with laughter and genuine warmth. Sarah was there, of course, taking full credit for lending me the dress that started everything. Pat brought war stories from her latest cases and pride in seeing her former apprentice building a career on integrity. My mother drove up from her new apartment, the one she could finally afford after recovering some of her stolen money through the Victim Restitution Fund. "You know what I've learned this year," I said, raising a glass of reasonably priced champagne to toast our gathered friends. "Sometimes the people who try to tear you down end up giving you your greatest strength. A year ago, someone called me trailer trash in a borrowed dress and slapped me for having the audacity to defend myself. The room grew quiet, everyone remembering that night and how far we'd all come since then. Tonight, I'm wearing a dress I bought myself, with money I earned doing work that matters, surrounded by people who love me for exactly who I am. And you know what? I wouldn't change a thing about how it all went down." The room erupted in cheers and applause. Ryan squeezed my hand under the table, not in fear this time, but in celebration of everything we'd built together from the ashes of his family's lies. "And you know what else?" I continued, grinning at the faces around me. "I may have grown up in a trailer park, but I learned something there that all the money in the world can't buy. I learned that your worth isn't determined by what you have, but by what you do when someone tries to make you feel small. I learned that sometimes the worst moments in your life become the doorway to your greatest transformations." Later that night, as Ryan and I walked home along the river, I reflected on how completely my life had changed. The scared barista who'd walked into that mansion a year ago had been transformed into someone who knew her own power, who understood that true class had nothing to do with bank accounts and everything to do with character. "Do you ever regret how it all went down?" Ryan asked as we paused to watch the city lights reflect off the water. I considered the question seriously. The public humiliation, the media circus, the months of uncertainty about our future. Had it all been worth it? No, I said finally. Your mother tried to destroy me with that slap, with those words. She tried to put me in my place and make me disappear quietly. Instead, she gave me the clarity I needed to choose justice over comfort, truth over convenient lies. In trying to break me, she helped me become exactly who I was meant to be. Ryan smiled, the same genuine smile that had caught my attention in that coffee shop so many months ago. And who is that? I looked around at the city where we'd built our life together, thought about the work we were doing, the family we were creating, the future we were building on honest foundations. Someone who stands up for people who can't stand up for themselves. Someone who uses her voice for things that matter. Someone who builds real things with people who see her for who she truly is. I squeezed his hand. Someone who never, ever lets anyone convince her she doesn't belong. As we continued our walk home, I pulled out my phone to check the comments on the video I'd posted earlier that day. The full story of what had happened at that dinner party, told honestly and completely in my own words. The response had been overwhelming. Hundreds of thousands of views and thousands of comments from people sharing their own stories of being underestimated, of finding strength in moments that were meant to break them. Thank you for sharing your story, one comment read. I was called white trash too, and I believed it for too long. Your courage gives me courage to speak up about what happened to me. This is exactly why I follow your channel, read another. You show that our backgrounds don't define our futures, our choices do. You inspire me to keep fighting for what's right even when it's hard. I smiled as I typed my response. Remember, when someone tries to tear you down, they're usually just revealing their own insecurity and fear. Hold your head high, know your worth, and never let anyone make you feel small. You are so much stronger than you know, and your story matters more than you realize. Because that's what I'd learned in that dining room a year ago. Sometimes the worst moments in our lives become the catalyst for our greatest growth. Sometimes being called garbage helps you realize you're actually gold that just needed polishing. And sometimes the people who try hardest to destroy you end up giving you exactly what you need to become who you were always meant to be. If you're watching this and you've ever been made to feel less than because of where you came from, what you do for work, or how much money you have in your bank account, I want you to know something. Your worth is not determined by other people's opinions of you. Your value doesn't decrease because someone else can't see it. Stand up for yourself, speak your truth, and never, ever let anyone convince you that you don't deserve respect. The Margaret Thornfields of the world count on us staying quiet, on being too intimidated by their wealth and status to challenge them when they hurt people. But here's what I learned. Bullies are bullies, whether they live in mansions or trailer parks. And the only way to stop a bully is to stand up to them, even when your knees are shaking and your voice is trembling. Don't forget to like this video if my story resonated with you. Subscribe for more real talk about finding strength in difficult moments, and let me know in the comments. What's a time when someone underestimated you, and how did you prove them wrong? Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today to find their own courage. Thanks for listening, and remember, you're not trailer trash in a borrowed dress. You're not street garbage that someone can slap around and humiliate. You're exactly who you're supposed to be, with exactly the background you're supposed to have. And that's not just enough. That's powerful. Now get out there and show the world what you're made of.